today. I hope you save space for your liver today. We've got more beer than we're used to having. Let me round up the stragglers out here. You can start pouring. Go straight to hell. He said ratings need a feeling, guess I fit the bill. Y'all keep yelling on the screen, I'll just keep the taps chill. With a grumpy top truck handle and a shower on the fire. He sold out every case before they cut to we'll be right back choir. Free beer all day long. Come on down and raise a glass and sing this freedom song. Resistance Pilsner in your hand. Tammy can you too. Just walk on in and raise your glass and sing this whole night through. Okay, how you doing, everyone? You have made it to Minocqua on one of the last weekends we have before we have to start getting serious about life again. Every single weekend that I'm here, and I'm just like you, I come here on the weekends and I go back to Madison, during the week. Every weekend I'm here, I try to do a beer tasting, to talk about politics, to talk about what this place is all about, and to sample our beers, because why wouldn't I do that? Because it ends up with people buying more beer when I do that. So just to let everybody know, if you're here, you probably know who I am. But if you're not, I own this place. I used to own the place like 2 football fields down that way. And then all of a sudden, COVID hit, and I didn't like how the government was treating COVID, and I started rabble-rousing about that, and I put up a big Biden sign on the side of the building, and it made national news, and it really pissed off most of the people in this town. And that's the start of the story. I will come back to the local aspect of most of the people in this town being pissed off because something happened just today, but that's along the way. And I wanted to start kind of with more politics, and I got a story for each one of these tastings here. And so that local story comes like in the middle. I always start, don't want to ruin your palates, so I start with the non-beer first, and then I go with the lighter beers, and I go with the darker beers after that. So this first one is our only THC drink that we have. So sample it wisely. You should, you should ask Kaylee to bring you some more. If she'll bring you some more. Did you reject it?
I didn't know.
So I always start with this one, and I usually say, when we do the THC first, I say that I talk about the craziest thing in politics this week, because THC makes you crazy. And by the way, it's legal. Weirdly, it's legal. This is called the Farm Bill of like 5 years ago made hemp-derived THC legal, even because it's not THC, but they just banned it in the big, beautiful bill. Trump just banned this, and we have until November to resurrect an entire industry that exists now in all throughout America. So we're hoping that somebody with a lot of money bribes Donald Trump to get this back, because that's all we need these days is bribery to be able to make the government do its work for us. But I say that this is, by the way, it's 8647 THC hop water. 8647 is hidden. We've hidden it in the weeds, in the hops and the THC, because it's terribly terroristic to say the words 8647. But But the theme with this one today, as you drink it, is the craziest thing that happened this week is a woman named Natalie Harper, who is 35 years old, and she is called the human printer for Donald Trump. She carries around a printer so she can print out tweets so he can read them in paper. But what we've just learned about her, because Senator John Ossoff just made fun of the fact that there's a 35-year-old hot blonde that walks around wherever he goes. And the funniest part of it, it's funny because obviously an 80-year-old narcissist needs hot blondes in his life to make sure that his ego is pumped up. But the non-funny part of that is that only until very recently was she given security clearance. So she's been spending a year and a half with the most powerful guy in the free world, and has had zero security clearance, and is a conduit for other leaders of other countries to get through to Trump without having to go through the proper channels. It's absolutely bonkers. It only happens in a banana republic, and you have to be stoned to actually think about this and make any sense of it. So that is how we start the day. 8647. Woo! It's called Zero Alcohol, Zero Calories, Tastes Like Patriotism. Liberate your liver. 8647 THC hot water. Okay. Next, we have called Choice Rosé, and it's our wine. We make a whole line of wine, and it's really good. And I'll tell you a little bit of background about it. I made this label called Choice, and we donate to reproductive rights groups with every bottle that we sell. And it's choice, which is pro-choice. So the CHO with the female sign, and if you look really closely, there's a doily around the O, and that's for Ruth Bader Ginsburg's collar. So that's what the brand stands for. I made it for beer right around the time we were losing abortion in Wisconsin, and nobody got it or bought it because generally the people who care about abortion and pro-choice are women, and they generally drink more wine than they do beer. So I found a winery in Sonoma, California, who partnered with me, and they're a great winery. They are co-owned by Jim Obergefell, who the Supreme Court case Obergefell v. Hodges is named after him. He was a gay man in Ohio who was partnered with another gay man who was dying, and he wasn't able to visit him in the hospital at the end of his life. He wasn't able to sign all of the power of attorney documents, and I think he got a head of a heart made out of absolute stone to think that somebody who loves somebody else shouldn't be allowed to be with them in a hospital at the end of their life. So they went all the way to the Supreme Court to fight so he could be with him, and they won in 2015. That's why it's a Supreme Court case, and that court case gave us marriage equality throughout America. So now, if you go to Equality Vines in Sonoma, California, this guy's like Jesus for the gay population, because the LGBTQ community, a lot of them have gotten married since this thing, and they come with their spouse and they shake this guy's hand because it's because of him that they were able to get married. So that's the story behind who makes the wine. I have a funny story related to this that applies to what's happened to us in the last 6 months. So who's heard of Free Beer Day? So Free Beer Day is probably the best thing I've ever come up with, and I came up with it while I was drunk. And I basically said, last February, the day he dies, we're giving away free beer all day long because this guy sucks. And I promise, just show this tweet to me or show this post to me, and I promise I'll make good on it. The next day, it went completely viral. Everybody loved it. And it's been a thing now ever since. Now, fast forward to, that was February. Fast forward to April. I went to Equality Vines and I went to Pine Mountain in Sonoma County, which is where the grapes grow for this wine. And this wine is way more, it should be way more expensive than it is here. It's not like touristy cranberry wine from Eagle River. This is actually Sonoma wine, but they make it, they price it so that I could sell it at a brewery in Wisconsin, and people aren't very fancy with wine in Wisconsin. But the grapes all come from this little place. It's got a high altitude, which makes white wine and light reds the best for it. And so I went there to propose to my girlfriend in April while we were checking on this wine, because it's such a romantic place. So I proposed to her. She said yes. Thank you. And we were about 2 bottles of wine in, celebrating, when we heard on the radio that there was an assassination attempt against Donald Trump at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. So, given the fact that I've got this thing that sold a lot of T-shirts called Free Beer Day, and given the fact there's an assassination attempt, I felt like I had to weigh in on the situation on Facebook. So I wrote this line. I said, either a brother or sister in the resistance needs to work on their marksmanship, or Donald Trump just faked another assassination attempt to get over a bad news cycle. You're all shaking your heads like, yeah, that's what happened. Well, I thought everybody agreed with me too, except there's 50% of America that doesn't. And they thought I was actually calling for him to be assassinated, or even at worst, that I knew something about it. And so the next day, another wild viral moment happened. Fox News was the first out of the gate. They always are. How do you feel about calling for the assassination for the president? The Daily Mail, which is this conservative rag in London, tried to talk to me, shame me, and I thought it was hilarious. But the whole world was pissed. I mean, like, the whole MAGA world was pissed off. So I was linked to the FBI and the Secret Service thousands of times. My phone was ringing off the hook with death threats. It was quite wild. And so I think it probably, I'm going to give eagle-eyed Kash Patel the benefit of the doubt. He probably didn't call the FBI, the Secret Service, to visit me that day. I don't think I'm that important. I have a feeling that if you get linked by MAGA trolls thousands of times, it may trigger something for you to get a visit. So in this very place, I was visited by the Secret Service and the FBI to ask me if I had any involvement with the attempted assassination of the president. So it all happened when I proposed to my girlfriend and I was drunk, but it showed me something. It was the first time that I wrote publicly. I was like, these guys, I had an hour before they were going to come, because I said I needed my lawyer present before they showed up. So I knew I had about an hour. And it was the first time that I was truly worried about being detained and maybe being put in a detention center. And so I emailed it, or I posted. I was like, if you don't hear from me again, there will be somebody in my life that says who they are and why they're speaking for me. But don't trust the federal government with what they say, and don't trust mainstream media if they report on what happened. Now imagine saying that 5 years ago. People would think that I was absolutely bonkers, absolutely Looney Tunes. They'd think I was an alien from outer space. But I think you can all understand why I might have written that phrase when I was being visited by the FBI, the Secret Service. It shows how far America has fallen since Trump has been elected. It shows how far our First Amendment rights have fallen since Trump has been elected. And but it reminded me, and it put me in a place where I kind of think I might be able to empathize a little bit with a lot of the folks that are getting detained and disappeared in detention centers around the country right now. It's a very scary thing. Okay, By the way, give a round of applause to Kaylee, who is serving you booze today. When I see she's got a full pitcher, I know that I'm being long-winded. What are we doing next, Kaylee? Are we doing Mexican lager? Okay. Okay, so the Gulf of Mexico Mexican lager. Let's go into talking about being brown-skinned in America right now. It's not easy. It's very scary, and my heart goes out to these folks. And what we've started doing with the sale of all of our beer and with the sale of all of our products on our Progressive website, we started doing a donation to the Illinois Coalition for Immigrants and Refugee Rights. We're making about a monthly donation there, and we're making a monthly donation to the Immigrant Bond Fund, the Midwest Immigrant Bond Fund, which handles all of the Midwest, and it raises money to get people who have been illegally detained by ICE, or even legally detained, because it doesn't matter what's legal or illegal anymore if it's the federal government doing it. It gets them out so that they can find safety and they don't get persecuted again. Gets those bonds out. So that's what we're doing for. That's what we're trying to do for immigrants right now. I do it in Illinois and not Wisconsin because, unfortunately, I think Wisconsin's a little bit behind. If you're from Iowa, I'm with you. I think they're behind too. I think Michigan's kind of behind, but I think Minnesota and I think Illinois are where I'm at in my brain in terms of fighting against ICE and fighting against tyranny. They're further along because they've been invaded by ICE and Trump. And that's kind of where I've been. So whereby companies' dollars are, and we sell beer in all three states. I'm a Wisconsinite, but I'm focused on helping where it needs help the most. And I think that Pritzker is the leader I want to follow right now because he's got the guts to stand up to Trump. So I'm focused a little bit more on Illinois. But I do want to break it up a little bit and let's have a little levity before I talk about how we're all going to lose our right to vote pretty soon. So this is the Gulf of Mexico. This is one of the funnier things that I've written in the past. And by the way, ridicule is one of the best ways to kill a regime. To overtake a regime. Because if you show everybody that the emperor has no clothes, then you show everybody the emperor has no clothes, and they don't respect him anymore. And we can see Trump's approval rating is in the tank. So some people might think that I'm a little too rough in what I write. And I say that I meet the energy that we're given by Donald Trump, and I try to, but I meet it with a lot more wit and a lot more humor, I hope, and satire. So here we go. On January 20th, 2025, America's twice impeached convicted felon signed an executive order that changed the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. Yes. By forgetting to reserve his only family brain cell that day, our lobotomized swamp donkey of a president unilaterally erased 5 centuries of geographic history. Regardless of what our McDonald's fart-filled blimp of a wannabe dictator says, the sane half of America, not the inbred cult of MAGA rockbiters, will always refer to that body of water correctly and with respect to our southern ally. We created the Gulf of Mexico Mexican lager for those in America who still have the courage to stand up to bullies and respect a world order that's held together by a common belief in democratic ideals and the rule of law. Salud! If you left your keys in the restroom, go to the restroom. Okay, the next one is abolish ICE. So this one it's a beautiful logo. it's a butterfly, which stands for migration, and it's got barbed wire, which stands for immigrants being put in detention centers behind bars. So it is a grapefruit goes. And a goes is a really cool fad in the beer world right now. Goes stands for like Goethe, Germany, and in that town they have a lot. Their water is saltier than other towns in Germany. So the beer that came out of Goes was salinated, it was salty. So, and because it was salty, it didn't taste that good. So they usually put fruit with it. So we have a grapefruit Goes in the style of the German Goes. But the reason we call this one Abolish Ice is because salt melts ice. So that's kind of the thing that we have on the back of this. I've already talked about it. Yeah, so ice has been funded to the tune of $70 billion. That is more money than any other. That's more money than the FBI gets. That's more money than the entire Russian army has. They are building a separate army that is separate from the Pentagon, that only answers to the executive branch, which is Donald Trump and the Trump regime. Now, why do you think they might want to do that? Because at some point, either the Supreme Court is also bought and sold, which is very scary, but there are judges who have stopped Trump, and that's the only branch of government that's been able to stop Trump, because the legislature, unless we can overturn the Republican legislature this November, if we have free and fair elections, which are questionable, federal judges are the only people who have been able to stop Trump so far. Well, if you build an army with $70 billion, you no longer have to listen to decisions that judges hand down. And if that army answers to you because they're all a bunch of Christian nationalists who get recruited to serve in ICE, and they don't have any training and they don't have any background checks, which is who we are hiring for ICE, that is what is building. It's a very scary time. And that's why any politician, especially Democrats who voted to allow the government to fund ICE, has to be protested, especially people from the Democratic Party, because they know this. It's not like I'm just creating this out of thin air. This is known, and there are Democrats who voted to fund ICE. There are Democrats, even our own Senator Tammy Baldwin voted to keep America, to fund America, and not when we were shutting down. That was the one chance we had to take money away from ICE and to force the regime to change how they were funding ICE by shutting the government down. We had that chance, and there were 16 Democrats in the U.S. Senate that voted to open up the government again. And Wisconsin's Tammy Baldwin did that too. So it's very scary. So that's why, by the way, I support more progressive folks in the Democratic Party who are not afraid to say ahead of time that they will abolish ICE as soon as they get into power. We should not be afraid of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. I used to be the moderate wing of the Democratic Party until the moderate wing became Republican light. And now I have been forced to be in the more extreme wing, which is not extreme. Just the rest of the country has moved over to crazy. Anyways, I digress. Let's keep on going. So next we got Kaylee. Woo! Kaylee! The Resistance Pilsner. Okay, well, don't worry. I'm long-winded. She'll figure it out by the time I get done talking about this beer. So the Resistance Pilsner, we made this the day after Trump won the election. This was going to be called Madam President. It was supposed to have Kamala Harris's face in front of here and 4 African Americans who she needed to stand on the shoulders of in order to become the first black female president of the United States. It's called Madam President. There's a poster of it behind our bar. In a day, I had to change this label. And the only one I could think of was the Resistance, because I knew we were in for a hell of a ride when Trump got elected. And I thought, what could we do with, I couldn't come up with a new label in a day. I had to just change the one I already made. So we put the Statue of Liberty in the middle, and we put the 4 presidents in U.S. history that I believe saved America when America needed saving the most. So the first one's obviously George Washington with the Revolutionary War. The second one's Abraham Lincoln with the Civil War. The third one is probably the most important one because it's exactly like the time we're living in today, which was the first Gilded Age, where we almost lost America to an oligarchy, to the richest guys in the country who were back then were Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and the like. Now we have Musk, Thiel, Zuckerberg, and Ellison, and many more. So, and then the fourth one is World War II, when we got past the Nazis, when we got past Germany. So they saved America when we needed saving America the most, and we are in the second Gilded Age now, and we are toe to toe with losing what we think, what we've grown up with, losing the country that we've been very proud of because of its liberty and its freedoms. We're toe to toe with losing that, and it's very important, super important that we pay attention. Okay, Kaylee. Oh, good. Are that the Pilsner still? Okay. I will be more long-winded on the Resistance Kolsch, but that's next. Okay, and you can just keep on going with that as soon as you do that. Okay. So speaking of the resistance movements that have happened in the past, luckily we have history. Unluckily in Wisconsin, who's from Wisconsin versus other places? Wisconsin, Minnesota. Okay, where are you guys? Illinois. Okay, there we go. Florida. Okay, Florida. Sorry, man. Sorry. I can't go to. Do I go to Florida anymore? No, I mean, obviously I love it. I love being on boats. I mean, why the hell would I live here? But it's hard to go to Florida, my friend. It's hard to go to Florida. They're really screwing people over. Worse than here. But, okay, but I digress. In Wisconsin, we've fallen from like number 5th in education and like number 25 because the Republicans have defunded public education for the last 20 years. If we were to be at number 5, I don't think we would have been in the problem that we're in now, because we're not teaching people enough about history. Because all we need to learn to get out of the current problems we have now is to learn about history in the past, because we have faced all this stuff in the past. So the reason I talk about Freedom Trail Kolsch is the beer we made to represent the resistance movement during World War II. So if you were caught behind enemy lines in Germany or Vichy France, you had to get back to America somehow, and you did that through going through northern Africa, and then you stopped at Casablanca, which is the movie Casablanca, which is why we have Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman on the can. You had to stop at Casablanca and then bribe somebody to get to Portugal so that you could then get a plane over back to America. So that was the resistance kind of movement that happened in World War II. The reason I talk about World War II is because we are living in the time that exactly happened in Germany before Germany fell to Nazism, before it fell to Hitler, before it became the Fourth Reich or the Third Reich. I can't remember. So Weimar Germany was the time where they actually had a democracy in Germany before Hitler rose. The reason Weimar reason Hitler won was because a lot of the judges in Germany came from families who used to be royalty during World War I, because that's what rich kids do, is they become lawyers and judges, and the royalty was wiped out in World War I. The Germans don't have kings and queens anymore after World War I, but they still thought they were kings and queens. And so a lot of the judges and the government officials were part of a world of Germany that wasn't so sure that democracy was the best way to go. So you had a lot of judges when Hitler came to power who were like, we don't like Hitler because he's a buffoon, but he's with us in dismantling some of democracy. And so the judges used the laws of Germany against German democracy. And they voted against things saying, this is our interpretation of the laws, and they slowly degraded German democracy so that it became very easy for Hitler to rise up and for them to have a dictatorship. Does that sound familiar to you at all? So over the last 20 years or 30 years since Reagan, there has been a thing called the Federalist Society in America, where judges or where kids who go to law school who happen to be conservative get enticed to join the Federalist Society, where they talk about their plans to take, they talk about their plans to dismantle democracy, but it's usually not said like that. But all of the judges who we have today who are killing in the Supreme Court, who are agreeing with Trump, who are making Trump immune to the law, who are deciding, who just killed the Voting Rights Act in the South, which allowed them to gerrymander the heck of the South, they all were part of the Federalist Society, which has been a 20 to 30 year long game played by conservatives to destroy our democracy. It's not just like all these Gorsuch and all these guys just got there by chance. That's the reason Mitch McConnell, God bless his soul, because he's not in hell. I mean, he's not in heaven. He's in hell. He's not alive right now. But that's the reason he wouldn't appoint, he wouldn't confirm, what's his name? He wouldn't confirm the attorney general who sucked to be when Obama's nominee. He wouldn't confirm him for like 300 days, because the whole plan for 30 years was to stack the court with people who would rubber stamp anything that a Republican president would do. So, what's the guy's name? Well, we can talk about idiocracy all day long, but this is not dumb. This is a very smart strategy that the Republicans had to pack the Supreme Court, and it's really hurting. So that's the commonality. We read history. We know that we are in pre-Weimar. We are in Weimar Germany right now, and we have to act like the next step is Hitler rising. It's very true. Okay, speaking of Hitler, I've got Antifa Oktoberfest here. Next. On the back of this can, there is a war bond, a picture of a war bond that America sold. Cheers. That America sold to raise money for the troops. And it's a picture of Captain America punching Hitler in the face. And it said Captain America puts the hit in Hitler. Buy war bonds. So obviously in 1940 it was okay to punch a Nazi. And that's why I say, is it okay to punch a Nazi? And on the front of this can, we have soldiers from World War II. Your fathers, grandfathers, or great-grandfathers landing on the beaches of Normandy who were fighting Hitler. And guess what those guys were called? Anti-fascists, or for short, Antifa. That's why if you park your car in my parking lot, I don't think we're zoned to have these signs here. I think I might have just put them up, and I'm waiting for the next shoe to drop when they try to tell me I can't have that sign up. We have Antifa parking only. Because if you're not anti-fascist, then what the hell are you doing in America? Right? So the word Antifa has been used to describe domestic terrorism in America. And I mention that because they've actually passed some executive order that said Antifa is a domestic terrorist organization. And you know why they're doing that? Because they are sending, we just heard this week, they are sending 1,000 agents from the Department of Justice to monitor elections that are coming up in November. Now, do you think these Department of Justice agents are really going to be there to monitor elections? No, of course not. Because all that we've been seeing coming from the Trump administration, from the SAVE Act to the building of his own personal army, is leading towards him trying to steal our elections. So what these monitors, I guarantee you, this is not just me thinking of this out of my brain. There's a much smarter guy named Mark Elias who writes on Substack, who's fought and won against Trump with federal judges against all these anti-voting things that they're trying to do to screw up our elections. Mark Elias is a DC lawyer who's brilliant, and he's at the forefront of protecting our democracy. He is the one who has said this. I'm just repeating it in northern Wisconsin. These observers are there to create a story that doesn't exist. They will witness elections, and they will say that these elections are fraudulent in blue cities, blue states, states, and swing congressional districts, just like the ones that we have in the 3rd Congressional District of Wisconsin that includes Eau Claire, Stevens Point, and La Crosse. They will also say that the elections in Madison are fraudulent, and they will say the elections in Milwaukee are fraudulent because if all those votes somehow chaotically are said to be fraudulent, then we can't elect a Democratic governor. We elect a rubber stamper for Trump in the name of Tom Tiffany, and he throws away our elections in 2028 entirely because he's the governor, and he'll be able to do that. So that is what we're dealing with in November. And it sucks to even have to talk about it. Luckily, there's a way that you can do something, and I'll talk about that soon in the next couple beers. I can't just leave you with that. I do want to read this to you today because not only is it a good piece of writing, because I write the copy and my graphic designer, I call myself Bernie Taupin. I write the music, and then Elton John plays the music. I write the lyrics to what I do here, and then my graphic designer makes it all happen. But I wrote this, and I think it's important for us to hear. Is it okay to punch a Nazi? According to Captain America in the 40s, it was. During World War II, America rose up against Nazi Germany and rejected the idea of fascism, which is defined as government led by a strong man that fetishizes power, uses violence to quash opposition, demands absolute loyalty, and gains power by seducing those who perceive themselves as victims. Does that sound like anybody you know? Over the last 70 years, we've honored our American forefathers who vanquished fascism in Germany. Those heroes were anti-fascist, or for short, Antifa. Unfortunately, fascism has once again raised its ugly head, not in Germany, but here at home, within America's borders. That's why we made Antifa Oktober Fest, a German-style fest beer that is uniquely American. Of course, it's not okay to punch anyone, but it's patriotic as hell to raise your fist against fascism, reject its 4 tenets, and embrace the true American ideals of democracy, freedom, justice, and equality of opportunity. Prost! Prosit! I would sing a German drinking song with you if anybody wanted to join in with me, but if it's just going to be me, I'm not going to do it. Okay, let's move on. Okay, Kayla, Underground Railroad. So we don't get to talk about positive stuff until Fascist Tears with Eagle-Eyed Cash Patel and Carolyn Levitt. We still have to go negative, unfortunately, because there's a good story here. So the Underground Railroad is obviously the resistance movement that happened during Abraham Lincoln's tenure during the Civil War. It's how we got slaves from the South back to the North into Canada to free them. So the Civil War and its direct aftermath plays a very important, tells us a lot about what we have to be worried about right now. So in the aftermath of the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, you had Andrew Johnson that was his vice president. Andrew Johnson was an absolute piece of shit. Abraham Lincoln, because he's such a good guy, tried to get people from the opposite party into his cabinet so they could work out problems together and he could build unity. But Andrew Johnson was a Democrat when Democrats were bad. 100 years ago or 200 years ago, Democrats were bad because they were from the South and they were the KKK, and the Democratic Party wanted slavery, and the Republicans were formed as abolitionists. It's obviously switched since then. But Andrew Johnson was the vice president, became the president. The Reconstruction period after Civil War didn't last very long. What really happened immediately after Reconstruction was that the South started making Jim Crow laws that restricted newly freed black slaves from voting. So if you've been a slave all your life and now you're free, you never went to public school, which means you can't read. So they started passing laws that say you have to be able to read to vote. They started passing laws that say you have to own property or you have to pay taxes, and freed black slaves didn't have any money. So they passed all these laws that weren't necessarily racist, but they only affected black people. So it made it so that they could then elect all of these racist, Christian nationalists, which is what you're seeing now happen right now. But they did that, and they got the South back, even after they lost the Civil War. Now, fast forward, this existed for another 100 years until finally Martin Luther King, and all the folks in the civil rights movement in the 60s finally marched in the South. They got beaten up, but they finally showed how awful the situation was, so that Lyndon Johnson, who became the president after Kennedy was killed, but he also was the head of the U.S. Senate, he finally agreed to pass the Civil Rights Act, which included the Voting Rights Act, which meant that the South couldn't gerrymander their districts so that blacks didn't have a say in who they could get elected. So it was called the majority-minority districts. You had to have, like, Baton Rouge or New Orleans, or, there's a ton of black people in those districts. You should allow the districts to form around them so that they can actually elect somebody who represents them instead of somebody who wants to put them down. It's obvious. And that's the way it's been, because the Voting Rights Act has protected that for 60 years. Now that we have a bought and paid for Supreme Court, they have just dismantled the Voting Rights Act, which Martin Luther King and all those hippies that you might have been a part of, or your mother or parents were part of, fought so hard for. It no longer exists in a way that has any fangs whatsoever. And that is why we've just seen so many southern states in the middle of every 10 years we're supposed to do this, not every year. They've gerrymandered all their states so that they can now slice and dice all these black districts so that African Americans no longer can have representation. It's just like we've gone back to the post-Reconstruction era of America. It's unbelievably horrible. So, however, there's one shining light to this. Trump is so unpopular that even if you slice and dice these districts, they might not get what they're looking for. And I have one example of this. In Texas, they sliced and diced huge Republican districts to make them less Republican, but to collect 7 more congressional seats so they wouldn't lose the majority, which they're destined to lose if everything's equal. They're destined to lose it, but they sliced and diced it. But those districts are full of Latinos. And in a normal time, if Latinos weren't getting disappeared to concentration camps, those Latinos voted for Trump because there's little patriarchy society stuff going on in the Latin culture. They liked Trump before he started shitting all over them. So I really think that we're not going to see what they thought they were going to see by gerrymandering all these districts. I do think no matter what, if we have free and fair elections in November, the U.S. House will go to Democrats, and it's quite likely the Senate will also go to Democrats. We just have to be able to have free and fair elections in November. So that's what we talk about next. Fascist tears, my dear. Okay, so this is a little fun one. We've got eagle-eyed Kash Patel on the thing here. We've got Pete Hegseth, whose hairstyle looks you should recognize his hairstyle to look vaguely familiar to a shit emoji in Facebook. And then you've got Carolyn Leavitt here, who now has quit because she was on the decoy plane. You know what I say when I mean the decoy plane? Trump was given a plane by Qatar or Qatar or however you pronounce it because it was $100 gazillion, but they couldn't retrofit it with missiles to actually protect Trump when he flies all over the place. So because he's a greedy asshole, he was at risk when our spy network discovered that Iran had a secret, was going to secretly try to assassinate him. Which is kind of funny in its own thing. The guy screws himself because he wants to fly in a posh airplane. So they tell him that, and instead of him standing in a podium like this, like Teddy Roosevelt did 100 years ago, was shot by an assassin and it hit a piece of metal, and he kept on giving the speech, and then Ronald Reagan was shot, because he wasn't too scared to be the leader of the free world with the Secret Service. He was shot and he joked to Nancy Reagan in the hospital. It's like, that kind of hurt. Instead, what's the guy in the Ukraine? Zelensky. That dude has got a target on his back a mile wide. That dude flies in his own plane and he goes to the United Nations and he cares about and he respects the folks he's got around him to protect him. The leader of the free world, Donald Trump, decides to put every single one of his cabinet members who were there that day on a decoy plane that could get blown up, so he's lost his entire cabinet. And he put Carolyn Leavitt on that plane as well, who just had her second or third child. With her baby. So instead of being the courageous president that America expects because we have the strongest military by a factor of 100, he hides and takes a decoy plane, leaves everybody else to potentially die, including this whole raft of journalists. And guess what? That might have been enough for Carolyn Leavitt. That might have been enough. She's been lying for this guy forever. Her whole life is built on corruption and lies. But she also had kids to think about. And she's like, I'm not going to be on the decoy plane ever again. And that's why she left. And that's why this can is a collector's item, because you're never going to see Carolyn Levitt again. Let's hope that's the case. I have one more joke to make about Carolyn Levitt because it's funny. Do I read the whole thing or just quit her joke? I'll read the whole thing. Our new summer session IPA is made with the fermented laments of some truly frustrated fascists. Eagle-eyed Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, gets so drunk that his staff needs to request breaching equipment to rescue him from behind locked doors. Pete Hegseth, who spent millions of your tax dollars renaming the Department of Defense the Department of War, gets regularly punked by his speechwriting staff. Instead of giving him Bible verses to read at Pentagon worship services, they plagiarize quotes from Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. Remember that? This is the best one. Press Secretary Carolyn Levitt, while attempting to de-Pinocchio herself by getting a nose job, couldn't shake the curse. The cross around her neck now grows larger every time she lies to reporters. Our new IPA will only get better with age, as the impending implosion of American fascism will surely intensify the flavors that these new organic tears add to the brew. Cheers. Okay, so that's our little funny thing. Let's pour muckraker, and then I'll talk about how we can protect our elections. So, but before that, let's do that German toast, shall we not? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Eine Prosit, der Gewinntlichkeit. Eine Prosit, der Gewinntlichkeit. 1, 2, 3, super! And I do that in remembrance of the post-World War II Germany, not the pre-World War II Germany, who have a pretty good lock on making good beer. Okay, so this last one I have for you today is called Muckraker. And this corresponds to Teddy Roosevelt's time as president, which corresponds to our Gilded Age, which I talked about first. So 120 years ago, America was living in a very similar time period as we're living in now. A very few amount of men owned most all of the wealth, and the rest of America was fighting for scraps. It also was deemed the people trusted their government the least. In America, we almost fell 120 years ago because everybody was poor, everybody was corrupt. This is a time of Tammany Hall in New York City where you just paid somebody and then you got your permits. Corruption in government was commonplace, and the rich had everything. So along comes Teddy Roosevelt, who came from wealth, and he knew how the game was played. But he didn't like it, and he wanted to fix it because he grew up being picked on because he was a small kid. That's why he learned how to box. He also lost his wife at an early age, and he went into seclusion in Montana, and he started working with a bunch of cowboys who were working class folk, and they taught him a lot about how to be tough and how to be self-sufficient. And he grew a respect for the working class because he left his palace, his family's palace in New York City. So now he comes back and he wants to be a reformer. He would have never been the president of the United States. He was a vice president first. He was a secretary of the Navy. Nobody liked him other than the fact that all the people wanted to vote for him, but all the people the corrupt people said, this guy's just a pain in our butts because he's uncorruptible. That was Teddy Roosevelt. He's ultimately the guy that helped break the backs, break the trust, break the Standard Oil Trust, break the Carnegie, break the Vanderbilt railroads. However, he never would have been able to do that if it weren't for people called muckrakers. You ever heard of the term muckraker before? So Ida Tarbell was one of the famous muckrakers, and she wrote a number of articles in McClure's magazine about Standard Oil, which was Rockefeller's oil company, about the labor conditions of Standard Oil. Basically, if a gear popped off the wrong way, you were just getting eaten up into that gear, and there were no rules. What I even know more about is the second most famous muckraker that I know of is Upton Sinclair, who wrote a book called The Jungle, who talked about meatpacking plants in Chicago. He talked about the fact that these Polish immigrants would come to Chicago with very little, with the hopes of having the American dream. These corporations, these meatpacking companies, would give them their housing, they'd rent them housing to live with, but because they cared about profit and profit only, the housing would be drafty and shoddily made, and so they'd all get sick. They also had the grocery store. The company provided the grocery store. Because all they cared about was profits and not humans, they put sawdust in the meat that was in a can so that they could get more money and more profit margins off of their spam. It was unhealthy for the immigrants. Even worse, if they got cut or hurt at the plant, there was no OSHA standards, there was no antibiotics. If they got hurt, they might die and their families would starve. He wrote that book called The Jungle. People were so disgusted by hearing about what was really happening in the working class that they supported Teddy Roosevelt. He would have never been able to bust the trusts and be able to do all these things that we have now called Social Security and OSHA and minimum wage and all that stuff. Francis Perkins is another person in that world who saw that, who got all these things passed. That progressive movement wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for ordinary people, right, who found each other, wrote about it, got together, organized, and said, we're not going to stand for this anymore, even though it might be easier for us to be corrupt. Just because everybody else is corrupt, we could make more money if we played their game too. Some people aren't built like that. Most Wisconsinites I know are not built like that. So they found each other, and some people started writing, other people started organizing. So muckrakers are what? So the modern day muckraker of today, in my opinion, one of them is Heather Cox Richardson, who has got a huge audience, who's a historian herself. I'm a historian, a C- historian. She's the real professor of this stuff. I just get drunk a lot and talk about history. But she's for real, and I'm C- for real. But I find people, but there's also other people, the Midas Touch Network, the Young Turks, these people, it's called independent journalism. And even Jim Acosta, who came from CNN to start writing on this platform called Substack, where a lot of these independent journalists are going. There's a guy I just talked to a guy, we're going to partner up, Nick Valencia from CNN, who was disgusted with what was going on with there. He's going to come up and do a story about us in the next couple of weeks. So, these are independent journalists who have chosen being poor or making less money than sticking with their mainstream media outlets who are now capitulating to Trump and becoming state media. So the one thing that I've done where I've taken my company is we've got a huge email list. Every time you buy a T-shirt from me online or buy a beer from me online or anything, we've got this marketplace with 120 progressive companies. I surreptitiously get your email address every time you buy anything. Do I sell that? No. Thank you. But I put your email straight into my Substack page, which is a C- version of Heather Cox Richardson Substack page. But it's focused on talking about progressive politics in the upper Midwest. She's a professor from the East Coast. So we may be C-, but we're the best. We're one of the best that the upper Midwest has right now. And I say that because we've been ranked top 50th in U.S. political Substacks for the last year. Because I got 165,000 subscribers. The open rate's 40%, and it keeps on growing because we keep on buying stuff. And it's not just me. It's Patty Vasquez, who's a talk show host in Chicago. It's Matt McNeil, who's a progressive talk show host in the Twin Cities. It's Ben Cominos, who's a progressive talk show host in Appleton. And it's even Michael Yoakum, who is the drummer for Jackson Browne and even Korn. Who's a wonderful writer. So I invite people smarter than me to talk about this stuff so we can get the truth out. And that's what the muckrakers did 120 years ago. So we're trying to be modern day muckrakers. But not only did we need muckrakers back then, we needed people who organize. So in Wisconsin, it's called the Fighting Oligarchy Coalition. You can also say it's the Democratic Socialists of America, or you can say it's the hippies of today, who are the college kids who don't want to grow up in a fascist society, who are actually the ones marching, and then the ones protesting, and they're the ones actually getting pepper sprayed in Chicago and in the Twin Cities. I'm a little too old and I don't want to get pepper sprayed. I'm going to sit behind. I'll type a lot, but I don't want to be the pepper spray guy. It's not what I want to do. I might eventually end up there. I don't want to. I still might, but I prefer for the younger kids to do that. But we got to fund them too. And so the next thing that they have to do, the muckrakers have to do, and I would argue that you have to do, is protect our elections in November. And so the best way, and so yes, and if you're in Wisconsin, you should vote for David Crowley. I think he's an establishment Democrat, but he's not a fascist asshole. So vote for Democrats for sure. But even more important than that is there's going to be chaos between now and November. And what you can do in your own hometown is you can ask your county sheriff in a public forum whether he'll do the work for his constituency, answer his constituency, or will he answer to Donald Trump. In every MAGA county, there is a MAGA sheriff that got elected because he said that Donald Trump was saying what was right. A lot of those MAGA counties also have deals with ICE to hold people longer so they can give those names to potential illegal immigrants who may not be, who might just be brown. So there's a lot of MAGA sheriffs out there in small towns and in Wisconsin who need to be asked publicly who they're going to stand with if a federal agent tells them to do something, but they know it's not legally right to do that thing come November. Similarly, you need to ask your assembly people and your state senators in Wisconsin or Minnesota or Illinois what the plan is for what happens if there's an if they try to mess with our elections. Because they should not be allowed to get away with not having a plan or not being able to answer you. They are our government, and they are our state government, and so is our attorney general, and so are our governors. Tony Evers is a Democrat. Pritzker's a Democrat. There's probably going to be a Democrat in Minnesota. They and the state legislature, Republican or Democrat, needs to be able to answer you, and you need to be able to hold them accountable between now and then to say, you got to do something. And then finally, sign up to be poll workers. Sign up. If you're not going to be the one, and or talk to your county clerk. These people could be your neighbors. It might be the county clerk who gets an FBI agent or Department of Justice attorney says, you need to give me the ballot boxes right now. And that county clerk, because she's never been faced by an FBI agent before or a Department of Justice attorney, is like, okay, I guess here you go. But that won't be legal because the federal government has nothing to do with our elections. So that person might be intimidated. So that person, you can talk to that person. And collectively, we can all talk to that person and make sure that that person knows that they can't do that. And or has to be surrounded by enough honest people around them that they can't do it legally anyways, even if they want to do it. That's how we protect our elections in November. And by the way, go to the Democratic Party meeting in your county and tell them to wake the fuck up. for one, and or organize it within the Democratic Party in your county. And so you do all these things to protect elections. There's going to be a ton of stuff coming out with groups on how you can do this. These are just my thoughts out of my top of my head, but this is what we have to focus on more than data centers, more than being pissed off about Palestinian genocide, which I am pissed off about. All that stuff matters, but we have to get past this election first. So that's the stuff. I hope that you can be a muckraker in your own hometown, and I hope you enjoyed getting drunk with me today. Cheers. Thanks a lot, everyone. I'm going to play some music again here. Holy cow.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I so appreciate it. And honestly, you're awesome. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, we're going to turn this off. End stream. Boom. Boom.